That's my new job.
No, the answer is no. So we're
I thought you were going to tell me I wasn't close enough to my mic again. Okay. Is it,
back
wait,
on.
are we reconvening? What are we calling?
Yeah.
Call the meeting to order. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Apologies to those who are watching. I know our feed just went down, and perhaps if you're watching this later on YouTube, you're going to notice an interruption as well. We were just experiencing some technical difficulties. It's my understanding that the feed cut out just after Ms. Angelou asked what some examples of the problems were that we experienced with the contractor from the last year's street repaving program. So I wanted to offer Mr. Renner an opportunity to just summarize what he said, and then we can move along.
Thank you, Chair. Basically what I was just talking about, as you said, Karen Edgelou had asked me for examples, and I said that they were bearing trash, and they were crushing drainage pipes that were, the drainage pipes that do run out to the curb. And there's photographic evidence of such, and that was actually passed along.
And we were thanking the director and the Department of Public Service for making sure that they fielded a lot of these concerns as they came in from residents. And we knew that you had it in hand, but we don't want to repeat some of those same issues from last year. And I think Mr. Crawford said that he had hoped that if that contractor wins a bid again or is selected again, that they would have learned from the errors. Is that all kind of a fair summary? Okay.
Yes.
We then discussed putting this item on a consent agenda on Monday, the 21st. So this item will be on no need for second since it's a motion, reading since it's a motion, so it'll be on consent agenda on Monday for authorization to bid. Item ORD 0005-2022, supplemental appropriation. Mr. Crawford?
Thank you. The next two items I have for you this evening are our standard quarterly supplementals. So we bring these to you, of course, every quarter because we have received funds for items such as damage to city property, sale of assets, insurance proceeds, or water meter purchases. So the city has expended funds to repair a fire hydrant that got hit, purchase water meters for a new development, and then we have received those funds back by charging whoever hit that infrastructure or purchased that service. So we respectfully request that we transfer these funds back to their respective expense accounts so we can utilize that funding for its intended purpose. So I apologize, I just combined two items into one, but.
That's okay. We're addressing 0005 and 0006, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion?
No.
Sounds great.
Do we need a recess?
No, but I don't know if you don't know Joe Spanovich, but he just passed away. And he's truly the reason that I'm in Gahanna all these years. Sorry.
I'm sorry to hear that.
We had seen him yesterday. We went to see him. And we were hoping that it would be a little longer. I'm sorry for the interruption. He's a wonderful person who did so much for the city of Gahanna. And as I said, my family would not be here if he was my mentor, 100%. And I love the fact that I've had 32 years with him. So, thank you. I apologize for the interruption.
Well, we will keep his family in our thoughts. So with these two items, I believe they'll be on for first reading on the 21st. No need to come back. Consent?
Consent.
Consent, okay. Consent agenda. All right, moving on to Section D, items from the Department of Human Resources. We have two items under this section. The first is listed on the agenda, ORD 0007-2022. And the other item is the addition to tonight, which is ORD 0011-2022. Director Volmer?
Good evening, everyone. The first item is a request to amend the salary ordinance that was passed at the end of last year. And the reason for this request is Mr. Crawford is staying with me in case you have additional questions, but as part of its 5-year staffing plan conducted in 2021, the Department of Public Service and Engineering identified the need for a utility supervisor to be requested in the 2023 budget. We had an unplanned vacancy in the position of Water Resources Engineer early this year, and after an evaluation of that pending workload and the needed skill set, it necessitated the need to advance the staffing request to this year. Currently, the Water Resources Engineer position is being scheduled for interviews. So the requested addition of the supervisor will serve as the operator of record for our Class 2 water distribution system and complete all EPA required reports. In addition, the supervisor will assist the superintendent to assign, coordinate, and supervise the work being completed by the Division of Water and Utilities. This additional position is needed in order to realign tasks between the water resources engineer, the streets and utilities superintendent, the new supervisor of utility, and the foreman who's over the utility and those equipment operators that work there. We finished a job description and sent this to the city's consultant who reviewed the position for point factor analysis and determined that it is best suited for pay grade 17. We also checked with Director Burry, who indicated there was funds available and reviewed and approved this request. So this request, we are asking for emergency and waiver so we can begin our recruitment efforts to fill this position immediately. Attached with it is a red line copy of the proposed ordinance for a change. You'll see at the bottom of the classification chart, it adds a supervisor utility at pay grade 17. Along on my report is the requested supplemental for 1% out of streets, 23% out of the storm fund, 38% out of the water, and 38% out of the sewer fund. And you'll see the account numbers and amounts needed under. And we did fund this position beginning the first full pay period in April. Due to the hiring timelines, that's the soonest. If it's passed on emergency and waiver, that's the soonest we would see anyone in that position. Do you have any questions?
No.
Is this replacing the water resources engineer?
No, it's in addition to the water resources engineer.
But it's a division of duties.
Correct.
Is the water resources engineer position being filled?
Correct.
Yes.
The application period closed yesterday, so the next step in the process would be to meet with Mr. Moorhead and Mr. Crawford to select applicants to interview.
If I might, Director Crawford, it might be helpful if you explain why this is being separated from when we hired Mr. Turner and what we learned.
Yeah, there's a handful of reasons. I'll say there's a couple of primary reasons. So when we were seeking to fill the position last time, and we hired Mr. Jim Turner, we're looking for what we determined, a lack of a better word, a unicorn position. What we were requesting, what we were wanting to see was not something that you would find in the industry. And that's primarily because, you know, we have a lot of engineers, a bunch of good engineers. You have a bunch of good utility operators, professional Ohio EPA Class 2 operators, but what you don't have is a combination of both of them. That is very rare to find an engineer that has both those classifications and both those experiences. We were incredibly lucky with Jim Turner. He did not actually have the EPA licensure, but he was so skilled and had been in engineering for so many years. He taught himself how to do some of those tasks. I was fulfilling the role of the EPA operator. He was basically doing a majority of the legwork, but it was under my licensure. We're not going to be able to find that. We're not going to be able to find someone that has both those licensures, and we really lucked out with Jim. So I wanted to make sure that we're seeking the position that we really need. Utility engineering is incredibly busy, from the sewer projects to all the EPA requirements that we have to do for, you know, lead and copper and all those other high-level engineering items. But we still need that operator of record, that Ohio EPA required operator of record. The other reason is our field staff have always lacked a supervisor that can direct their operations. We have a foreman who is fulfilling some of the EPA duties as well, and is also an operator of record in the union that is overseeing the entire water distribution system. And we ask that person who is not a supervisor to try and supervise but has no power to supervise. So that also is a real big challenge in trying to supervise staff and direct operations when you're a foreman in the union and you can't do anything, and you're also tasked with overseeing certain EPA requirements for the entire distribution system. So this would help to support, both operations, allow the water resources engineer to actually be that strong utility engineer, allow our field staff to have more people in the field, allow that foreman to actually be on the job and direct the job, and then provide us a supervisor that can, direct those operations from the high level, as well as be that operator of a record for our entire distribution system. And also, I can't forget about our wastewater collection system and our stormwater collection system as well. So, sorry, that was a very long-winded response.
But thorough.
And the net impact to the budget that was approved? Could you speak to that, please?
So the supplemental appropriation should not impact the budget. It's on a small level. I don't expect to have any effect on it,
And
any
it's,
real effect.
yeah, and it's not out of the general fund either.
Okay. All right. And so 0007-2022, you're requesting waiver and emergency, so we'll have that on regular agenda for Monday, the 21st. Does that sound acceptable? Okay. Ordinance number 0011-2022.
Thank you, and I apologize for the late ad. Back last year, in the fall, we asked that you approve a contract extension with the FOP OLC. That union group represents our 911 dispatchers. We are currently still negotiating with that union, and that contract extension was set to expire on February 26th. Due to scheduling issues and some COVID issues, it is not likely that we'll be able to reach an agreement prior to February 26th, so we are requesting a second extension, which would run through September 26th, 2022 at the latest. If in September the two parties have not agreed, have a mutual agreement, that agreement will then force the city and the union into fact-finding on the date of September 26th. So we would respectfully request emergency and waiver on this as well in order for it to be executed prior to February 26th, 2022.
Just as a housekeeping matter, this is listed as action item number 2 on the report under the first ordinance listed on the agenda. The ordinance, however, was not yet uploaded, but it will be on the agenda for the 21st. Any other questions or comments regarding this item?
Just a little nit. So we did get this ordinance early enough from the administration early today, but there's a technical problem why it could not be added to the electronic version of the agenda.
Yes. Okay, you're requesting emergency and waiver on this? So this will be on regular...
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So this will be on regular agenda next Monday, the 21st.
Thank you.
All right. Item E, Section E, items from the Department of Finance. Director Burry. We've got 3 items. We'll start with ORD 0008-2022.
So, all 3 items are related.
Okay.
So I thought instead of going through each of them, that maybe we could discuss the recap first, because the recap is going to be
It's not on, Joanne.
on now.
Maybe?
There you go.
Okay. Sorry. So instead of going through each of the action items, maybe going through the recap first, and then I could indicate from the recap what the associated action item is, if that's okay.
Perfect, yes, thank you.
Okay. So all 3 action items are related to a recommended new procurement policy put in front of council. So I just wanted to go through the recap first, why the amended procurement ordinance, what the reasons were behind it. So at the forefront, there's the federal funding requirements. The current policy does not contain the requirements outlined in the federal uniform guidance. We did receive a management letter comment from the auditors in 2020 in regard to that. So this will also address an audit comment that we received when they did our single audit in 2020. Clarification and consistency, I think it's become brutally clear that everybody looks at the current language and interprets it a little bit differently. This has obviously caused some confusion and inconsistencies on how we procure items, services. The third is alignment with current operations. The current ordinance identifies a single procurement person. Rather, we operate in a decentralized environment where each department can make a request for procurement without going through a specific department or person. Solidifies responsibilities. So the one area where all purchases do get centralized is in the finance department. So under our current operations, each department may have one or many purchasing agents. They enter requisitions under the direction of a supervisor or director. Those are ultimately routed to the department director to approve it. They then all come to finance as I'm required to certify that appropriations have been made, are in the process of collection, or are collected and are free from any other encumbrance. So as kind of that final stop to put the certification on those procurements and turn them into actual encumbrances, it moves the responsibilities for processes, forms under the finance department. Noting that as part of that, there might be some procedures that are still delegated to another department. At the forefront, the main thing that comes to mind is the sealed bidding. That obviously would stay with the public service department. So that would be an area where finance would delegate that particular responsibility will remain under that department. It also defines the requirements for professional services. So under the current procurement policy, when you go under the competitive bidding area, it says that professional services are exempt from competitive bidding, but then really doesn't provide any direction on how we are to procure those types of services. So this policy defines what those procedures will be and also defines what is professional services. You'll also notice when you receive the updated procurement policy, there was no red line version to give you. That's because the current policy would be completely redlined. We completely overhauled, changed the flow, added the federal requirements. So rather than redlining, if you look at the changes made portion of the recap, this kind of states what we did major change-wise, and then shows a comparison between current policy and what we're proposing with the new one. So under the changes, the first one is the remuneration. As identified above, we kind of determined that as finance being the final stop for all the requisitions kind of coming through the city, that it should actually be remunerated under the finance department. The procurement thresholds, in addition to adopting the federal uniform requirements, we also adopted the federal acquisition regulation thresholds. So this is where for federal procurements, this is kind of where they set their thresholds. What I did to kind of make it hopefully easier is I went to the maximum. So this is kind of what's in here, or what's proposed is the high bar. And then trying to figure out, if you know this is as high as you can go, where is kind of your comfort level as we get council input on these. Consistency, again, overhauled the complete flow of how it goes through to try to remove some of those misinterpretations or provide a better flow to how we're processing the procurements as it's outlined in the ordinance. And then I'll just quickly go through kind of those thresholds and what we're proposing. Everything is kind of laid out in the actual ordinance itself in more detail, so this is going to be very high level, kind of pointing to those areas where the new thresholds are. So under the current policy, there's petty cash. So petty cash is an easy way to reimburse our employees for small out-of-pocket expenses. Current policy under 135.04E allows this for reimbursements up to $20. That level has not been updated for a very, very long time. We really feel that that's low based on today's cost of doing business. And as a way to keep kind of efficiency and getting that money back into our employees' hands as quickly as possible, we want to raise that threshold to $100. The next level of purchasing is the micro purchase. Under our current policy, this is $1,000 to $3,000 and just requires obtaining a purchase order through finance. Under the new policy, this will be the micro purchase that falls under the federal acquisition regulations, or it would be up to $10,000, just requesting a purchase order from finance. After the micro purchase, we then have the small purchase threshold. This one has a couple components to it. So it's above the small purchase amount, so it's more than $10,000. If it's required to be bid, it would be up to that $50,000. But if it doesn't require to go through the sealed bid procedures, it would go up to $250,000. This again is under those federal regulations, and this would just require getting an adequate number of quotes from respective suppliers and vendors. Next, we have the sealed bid procedures, which are pretty much the same as what is in the current policy. The only thing that has changed there is you won't see any exemptions for reverse auction, and we'll get to that kind of a little further down in the list. But it, again, provides for those same exceptions: purchases from qualified nonprofits, emergency purchases, purchases from other government agencies, purchases of used equipment, and professional and personal services. Once you get past that, this is where it kind of addresses the professional services piece. So it's basically saying those professional services are not subject to the sealed bid requirements called competitive bidding under our old policy, but we are saying that it's more than the small purchase. So anything that's more than $250,000 that would meet one of those exemptions, basically for professional services, would have to go through a competitive proposals process where we would use various scoring and then report back to council how we identified those scoring processes, how we scored each vendor, and then similar to the sealed bids, making recommendations on who we recommend that council authorize the mayor to enter into contract with. There's also a non-competitive or sole source. I believe this was in the current ordinances, but I believe it was kind of in with the competitive bidding or sealed bids procedures. So this kind of pulls it out as a separate section that basically says if you're not going to procure by competition, there should only be a few reasons why you do that. It's a single source, it's an emergency, the federal awarding agency expressly authorizes it, or after trying, it's just determined that competition is not possible. The last piece with the reverse auctions. So this is in our current policy. We did a little bit of research and then realized that it's never been used. And then identified that there are some risks associated with these types of transactions, so felt that there was no reason to carry that over to the new procurement ordinance. The last kind of set of changes are a new section that was added that addresses specifically compliance. There are a couple things that were added: suspension and debarment. Prohibitive bidder was always in, but it kind of added this federal level of the suspension and debarment. So adding that piece. Maintenance of records, it's required under the uniform guidance. Retainage, we just carried over from the current policy. Proper public purpose, so this is kind of a big one that was missing from our current policy. Basically, any purchase that we make should be for a proper public purpose. That's specifically defined in the new procurement ordinance. There are also 2 auditor estate bulletins that deal with beverages, food, token gifts. We do make these kind of purchases, but the policy was kind of silent, and those auditor estate bulletins basically say it's okay, but legislative authority has to state that, yes, they believe these are proper public purpose and do appropriate for these items. So that was added as kind of a catch-all to meet state code and also those 2 specific bulletins from the Auditor of State's office. So with that, we'll now kind of go through the various actions that you see in front of you. The first one is rescinding the current code under the Public Service Department, 135.03 to 135.08, repealing that and replacing it with the new section, the 133.02. That's where the remuneration comes into place, repealing the current and then replacing it with the new. The second action item that you will see references a code that's currently out there that's obsolete. 133.02, it was adopted back in 1976 and deals specifically with vending machine income. We no longer receive that type of income, so just asking for this to be repealed and removed. There's no necessary, it's not necessary. And then the final action that's being requested is the adoption of the new purchasing ordinance, or the 133.02. So at this time, I'd be happy to address any questions that any of you may have.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joanne, appreciate the presentation. Do you have, just off the top of your head, a couple examples of when or how or what sorts of items will be procured or acquired using the petty cash policy?
Yeah, it's usually, they go to a day training, and it might be downtown, and they're allowed to purchase a meal.
Okay.
So they would purchase that meal out of pocket, come back with the substantiation, and then request reimbursement. Parking is another big one. If they need to go someplace, they need to pay for parking. That comes out of pocket, and then they come back and request repayment.
Okay. And did I hear you correctly? You said that the numbers that are in this proposal are the federal maximum, is that correct?
No, so the federal uniform guidance does not address petty cash.
Okay.
This is more our own operations and kind of looking at that number and looking at how often it's been updated. It's never been updated. And I think it just is, based on the cost of doing business today, too low.
So is that $100 figure sourced or referenced from somewhere, or is it basically your opinion?
Professional judgment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Thank you for getting this done. Appreciate it.
If I could, I think the presentation of this is really meant to be a starting point for dialogue. This is a very involved policy. We expect you to take time to review it, stew on it, come back and have continued conversations as we move forward. But as Joanne said at the outset, the reason for this policy is manifold. But largely, we receive federal funds. We need to have a policy that is following the federal guidelines. And it was called out in our, I think the last auditor's comment, as Joanne noted. So besides the fact that our code is very antiquated and it's contradictory, and we have long found problems and challenges with trying to understand and having differences of opinion as to how to interpret the code. So this would help in a multitude of issues, but certainly we have to update the policy because of our receipt of federal funds.
Just to piggyback on Mr. Schnetzer's question really quick, and then I'll come to you, Council President. The $250,000 threshold, is that the federal guidance number?
Correct.
And do they distinguish between, budget sizes or municipal budget sizes in giving that number?
No, it's just how they laid out the uniform guidance when it came about a couple years ago, where they updated all the thresholds. They themselves found their initial thresholds to be a little low based on the current cost of doing business. So they did a big overhaul over those thresholds and increased them.
Oh, so these are what the federal government uses for themselves?
They require that local governments or those that receive federal funding have these thresholds. These are the thresholds they currently have in the uniform guidance. but we don't necessarily have to reach those maximums they're laying out. It's just basically saying this is as high as you can go.
So the 250 is the high maximum.
Correct.
I understand. Okay. Mr. Renner, yes.
Yes. Joanne and Mayor, I thank you for the work that you guys have put into this, and thank you for allowing us to have a little bit of time to actually digest. The decision tree that you have attached, for me, has been very helpful to weed through these legislations.
Great.
And so I definitely, it's a little busy to get through, but I really have enjoyed using this tool to help discern and understand the necessity of what you're trying to do. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So with your comments, Mayor, are you suggesting that we hold this in committee for further discussion?
No,
Or
I think it could go for first reading and come back.
Continue committee after
It's
that.
it's going to
Okay.
need to come back to committee.
Okay, first reading and come back. All right. Any other comments from council? All right, I think on behalf of council, we'll express our condolences to the Spanovich family tonight as we adjourn. Thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, Ms. McGregor.
I didn't realize we were at the end. Joe Spanovich is not, he was a mayor when they had part-time mayors. Then he was a council member, I believe, wasn't he a council
Well,
member?
he started out as a village mayor.
Okay.
And then we became a city, and he couldn't, and he was also a principal in Whitehall schools, but you couldn't do all of those things, so he then gave up, he stayed obviously
He might have
as his
been the-
principal.
He might have been the last part-time mayor.
He was, absolutely.
And then he was principal in Whitehall for his career, and then he was township trustee for a number of years.
Well, yeah, he was actually on city council
Right.
for a long, long time. And then, I think it was when when your husband got elected, he went to the township,
Okay.
in Mifflin Township, and he was there for quite a long time. He just retired like maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He's 93 years old. He's just been a wonderful mentor. And it's just hard to understand that. My husband says we ought to call Gahannovich. So he says because he has had so much to do with this
Yeah,
community.
he's been a long-time elected official, that's for sure.
Yeah. And he
Okay.
did things well.
That's all I had to say.
Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that.
All right, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.